Welcome back, my friends, as I am working on coming up with set 8 builds that I can put out on release day, which isn't until December 6th. I was clearing out my drive and came across a bunch of videos from TFT's past, and I thought it would be fun to go a little bit down memory lane. Now, this one right here, where I just made the top 4, is the first video I ever uploaded to YouTube, and you might recognize it. This is set 2, where they did elemental hexes, and you could get more power based on them. This was ranked. There was no hyperroll back then, but this is what started me doing TFT on YouTube. But of course, that's when there was only ranked, but then they invented hyperroll, and so let's take a look down the hyperroll memory lane. I started doing hyperroll videos with set 5 when I realized you could create an absolutely unkillable Warwick. They had the right items where he would gain health for every attack that he would make, and so every time he would ult, he would just be gaining health. You can see that health bar is just out of control, and ultimately they took these features out in the second half of 5, but for the first half it was a lot of fun. But the thing that made people really mad back then was Hellions. And I can't say I really blame them. It was ridiculously strong. If you look at my health here, you might go, hey, 17, that's a really weird number. But maybe you don't remember or weren't around at the time. Buying a Teemo cost you 1. So for me to get a 2-star Teemo, it cost me 3 health. So the reality is I got through this match with Hellions without losing at all. It just got people angry. And as you can see, my opponent thought I needed a shower. So I took a quick bath and then got back to the match. Many of you might remember this clip when a Kale absolutely tried to kill my vampire, but that vampire was having absolutely none of it and just refused to go down because you could make some pretty strong champions in set 5. You could create giant zombies that would pop out of the grave and wipe out the entire rest of the team pretty much on their own. Or you could watch a Gwen with almost no health take out the large part of a team to keep you in the game when you didn't think you had a chance. Maybe that's why they haven't brought her back since. But my personal favorite build from set 5, and both 5 and 5.5, was the Skirmisher Ironclad Jax build, because watching Jax just take apart a team and them not to be able to kill him was just a little too much fun. But I certainly don't think we've seen the last of Jax yet.
Surprise! I'm back.
But then came set 6, which was my favorite TFT set yet. And sadly, that's going to include set 8, but this is where they introduced augments for the first time, which I felt took out some of the RNG, a large part of it, and allowed you to craft teams. And it wasn't my favorite just because we had builds like Yordles that also just made people angry. It's TFT, people. Come on, relax. And I know Amy will appreciate this, but we had Lux who could wipe out entire teams with just a few casts. Spoiler alert, she's really not that strong in the new set. But the other great thing about set 6 is that there was more than one way to skin a cat, pun intended. Katarina was incredibly strong in an assassin build, and she could pretty much single-handedly take out a team and absolutely dominate the damage charts. But this was back when assassins ruled the day, and it almost didn't matter which one you picked up. You want a clown in your backline? Well, that's going to dominate as well, as Shaco just could single-handedly wreck teams. And of course, with the assassin emblem, you could create incredibly strong assassins using some of the other abilities, such as an Imperial Samira, who could completely wreck a team all on her own. We had Socialite Fiora, who could rip a team apart so fast they wouldn't even know what happened to them. Vi and Jinx were still on good terms, and when they worked together, they absolutely could not be stopped. They would destroy the damage charts as a team. We had a giant crab monster who was actually capable of dealing with the Yordle threat if you caught him strong enough. Little spoiler alert, Urgot is back in Set 8, and he's a legendary unit. And although we were nearly a year away from Dragonlands, Set 6 had a dragon of its own, and it didn't take up 2 spaces. It was actually an addition to your team, and this dragon could pretty much guarantee a victory almost every time you could summon it. But probably my favorite build of Set 6 was the Bodyguard Enchanter build, in which you could pretty much get just defensive items on defensive champions and withstand anything the team throws at you, even against a dragon, which, as I mentioned, pretty much would guarantee a win. A team filled with Bodyguard and Enchanters could just outlast them. Ultimately, Orianna was an enchanter and had a lot of power, but it was really just the ability of this team to stay up this long that allowed them to win so many matches. Then Set 6.5 came along, and even though they added a little more RNG into the augments, they added some amazing new traits like Hextech Striker, which made an incredible combination and could guarantee early victories. And us no-brain, dirty Yordle players, well, we didn't have to worry because that build remained, just the carry changed. Instead of Heimer, the answer was now Corki, who could absolutely decimate teams with huge amounts of damage. Syndicate Assassins was replaced by Syndicate Snipers, with Zeri becoming so overpowered that she had to be nerfed multiple times throughout the set, but you can see just how much damage she turned out and how quickly. But don't worry, Assassins weren't gone, they just became more dignified as the Debonair trait helped champions like Talon just wreck entire boards. With the right items, he took over for Shaco as the leader of the Assassins. But one of the things I like most about the Debonair trait is that with proper itemization and the best augments, even a one cost like Bran could absolutely carry your team and destroy the damage charts. But if you played TFT towards the end of 6.5, this next build will give you nightmares. Once discovered, Renata Bruisers became one of the most played comps, and it was fairly easy to force, even though there was always competition to it, and it's just who put it together the fastest would end up winning. It carried a lot of people into hyper tier and will live in our nightmares for a long time. And then along came 7.0 and Dragonland. And despite the name in the first half of the set, dragons were not required. One of my favorite builds was the Dragonmancer Volibear Legend build that you see here. And there are elements from this build that follow into Set 8 that I will go over once we hit the Set 8 video. Guildmage was also a contender for one of the top builds in the game early on, with Ryze carrying teams to victory with an unreasonable amount of power by stacking the Guild and Mage traits together. With his own stacking bonus, Ryze was able to pretty much one-shot champions every time he cast as the game pushed on. In the first half of Dragonlands, I feel I spent more time around non-dragon-based builds, or builds like Trainer, where you would summon a dragon as part of the build, but it wasn't taking up 2 spots on your board. I found these builds to be a lot more manageable and really, really powerful and less contested, as everyone seemed to want to go dragons. We were able to work Trainer into lots of different builds, from mages to cannoneers to Revel. They all worked really well, and Namzi was a welcome addition to the team. It allowed you to combine lots of different traits all together to make for a powerful combination, even against what would later become one of the most powerful builds in the game. But before talking about that build, let's revisit that Cavalier Swift Shot was a build that you could carry all the way to the end in 7.0. It dropped off in 7.5, and while it is an incredible start, it doesn't necessarily carry you through to the end the way it did in 7.0. But that Cavalier buff was enough to keep you on top, and the Swift Shots could do so much damage that they could take over a match. And of course, no discussion of 7.0 would be complete without the build that built itself, which was the Astral Bruiser Swift Shot build. Putting all the key items onto Varus would allow you to take over matches and allowed me to take an account from 0 to hyper in less than 30 games. And that brings us up to our current season that started with giant Yetis gobbling teams down for over 20,000 damage. And of course, other players weren't happy with this. To abusing Dragonmancer Karma to get easy victories, which of course, other players weren't very happy with. We saw the rise and fall of the Seraphine build, where I can't tell you how many matches I had that ended up exactly like this, with the same build against the exact same build. I never ended up putting out this video because by the time I had recorded and voiced it over, they had nerfed the build into near non-existence. But this is what it was like for a while. But ultimately, 7.5 was really the build of the dragons, whether it was using Zippy the Drunken Dragon to get into enemies' backline and completely muck them up while your Swift Shots did all the rest of the work, or transitioning over to an almost exclusive dragon build that would end up wrecking enemy teams by getting into the backline. As you can see, a lot of games came down to this, where it was multiple dragons against multiple dragons. Usually the person with the most dragons would end up winning. But of course, by this point in the season, we've all learned the big secret to Dragonlance. And it's not even necessarily a collection of dragons, it's one dragon, because when Aoshin casts, teams just die. I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane and some highlights from videos from the not too distant past and the way past, although I've been playing this since alpha and the very first day when there were 18-hour queue waits, and I would leave the computer on overnight just to get in and get to play for a couple of hours before they had to do an update and kicked everyone out. But it was all worth it when you got in to play this incredibly unique, fun, interesting, oh, what else can I say about it? It's just an amazing game that I've really enjoyed over the last few years. And even though I don't like every set equally, with 6 being my favorite, 2 probably coming in next, 8, well, there are some really good aspects of it and some things that might not make everyone very happy, and I will be going over it on December 6th when I release my big video in anticipation of the actual release happening on December 7th. I've come up with lots of fun builds that can help get you to hyper pretty quickly. There are a lot of options in this set and things that can make it change just on a dime. But the one thing that's been reinforced for me on the PBE is how great the TFT community is and how not toxic it can get as people play and just, well, you know what? Stay salty, my friends. And as always, hope you have an absolutely awesome day.